All right. Hey, good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to our weekly Ship Show series. So, this is the show where we break down all things supply chain. And this week, we've got a very special show for you and a very special guest. But first, my name is Jason Brand. I'm the Director of Outreach and Partner Development here at Supply Chain Solutions. And my co host is Anthony D'Ambrosio, who's our Vice President of Sales. So, unfortunately, he's not able to be with us here today, but be sure to tune in next week to hear his insights on the freight market. And before I introduce our guest here, I want to quick talk about the show itself. So, if you're a regular watcher, you know that we have two freight market roundups a month. That's a show where we basically take a broad view and we discuss rates, what we're seeing on all the major trade lanes. And then we also have these other shows. They're called deep dive episodes, and that's where we focus on a specific topic. So that's what this show is here today. And this show really came out of a need to discuss contracts because it's a really hot topic right now. And a lot of shippers just really aren't sure what their plan is for the remainder of the year. And we can definitely help with that. So that's where our guest comes in, Melissa Alvarado. Melissa is our managing director of international carriers, and she, as Anthony would definitely say, has her finger on the pulse of exactly how carriers are feeling, what they're thinking, what their plans are. And a cool thing about Melissa is she comes with this excellent perspective. So she's worked on both sides of the aisle. She's worked for logistics providers and shippers themselves. And she's got also for carriers. And she's got a fantastic idea of these pain points and really all the things that matter when you're at the negotiating table. So, Melissa, huge thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Oh my gosh, we're literally so excited to have you. So I want to set the table here a little bit, and I'm gonna just get on a huge soapbox. So get ready. I want to touch on a few things, and then I want to shift our attention back over to Melissa to get her opinion on some of the stuff going on and some of the stuff I've talked about, and also so she can kind of discuss some strategies in this marketplace. But if you are a shipper that generally contracts with carriers, you definitely know you've had a rough past couple of years. And right now, the beginning of this year, the smoke is starting to settle on this just really challenging market. And we're obviously not out of it. The carriers are still pulling a lot of levers and still manipulating the market in a way that's making it still challenging, even though rates are kind of showing us a different story. But, we need to talk about this right now because it's contract season. And, here's the deal. Shippers right now, their gun sights are pointed on contract and the purpose of ocean contracts after the pandemic. And, there's a lot of great examples where the carriers failed. And I want to highlight a couple of these before we start talking about this. So, the most recent one, and the one that really caught my attention just last week, it's a new FMC complaint. And it's saying that the carrier Evergreen forcefully pushed its contracted cargo into the spot market during the pandemic. Now, this complaint, it just came through by a Utah-based firm. They're called CertaFit Inc. And they basically said they signed a one-year contract with Evergreen. They signed it in April 2020, and it was an MQC, or a minimum quantity commitment of 1,000 TEUs. Now, Evergreen, the carrier, they only provided 350 TEUs. And then CertaFit is saying that they forced them into the spot market and had to pay substantially higher rates to get on these same vessels they were contracted to be on. And one of the reasons why I love this FMC complaint is it really highlights the problem perfectly. So imagine you're an airline and you're selling seats on a plane. If you sell more seats than you have, is it okay to punish the buyer, or should the airline be punished? Because in the ocean shipping world, it's basically exclusively the buyer that's punished, and generally speaking, severely. Now, in the case of CertaFit, they're claiming they had to pay an extra $750,000 to secure that space gap in the spot market due to Evergreen's failure to hold up their space requirements. So, you could imagine if you're in the shipping community getting back into contracting season right now, it's a headache. I mean, how confident and how comfortable are you with this? Now, I want to talk about a couple other things too, because there's a lot of other stories of this same situation happening. This is not just a one-off event. I mean, obviously we've talked about it on the show, but there's a lot of really big situations and quite frankly, sad situations that happen because of this. So Let's talk about another company. You might know them, Bed Bath and Beyond. So, they seemed like they were robust enough prior to the pandemic, but now they're seeking nearly $32 million in damages from OOCL. And Bed Bath & Beyond is saying they paid out over $32 million in excess between 2020 and 2022 of what they should have based on their contracted rates. And this is due to OOCL's inability to fulfill their service agreements that were written into the contract. And so, I just have to say this. OOCL happens to be part of the same ocean shipping alliance as Evergreen, but this is not just that alliance's issue. This is widespread. And this failure to honor capacity agreements was happening all of the time. So I want to highlight another one back in June of 2022. And to kind of put you into the right frame of mind for this period, these were some of the final months of really elevated freight rates. It was kind of turning the corner into peak season. And then we started to see, wow, volumes out of China are a lot softer than they should be. Wow, capacity is not where it should be. We're not still increasing. There's a definite change happening. So at this time, an Illinois-based gourmet foods importer, they filed a complaint with the FMC, and they alleged that the container lines Yang Ming and HMM not only failed to provide contracted ocean freight capacity, but they also claimed that they acted in coordination to push the shipper into the more expensive spot market. Obviously a pretty aggressive complaint. And the sad thing is that, I'm highlighting a couple here, but you're seeing, and we have seen the same complaints echoed over and over and over again. This idea that I'm getting on the same vessel, I was pushed into the spot market, and why am I subject to paying these extra rates? So, I think what I like about the Certifit FMC complaint and why I started with that one is they're not only seeking damages from the ocean shipping line, but they also are looking for the FMC to ensure and figure out a way that in the future, FMC cannot refuse contracted cargo. And this really is a huge ask because it's going to require these ocean shipping alliances to just completely change the way they contract. If you go back to that example of airlines selling seats, you have to think now they have to keep track of how much they're selling when it's shipping. It's a lot more complicated for them. And, we may be in a situation where we're at a technological point where we can do it properly, right? And maybe these complaints are needed. And maybe this whole breakdown during the pandemic and the massive amount of money that the ocean shipping lines made gives us this ripe opportunity to make effective changes so this doesn't happen again. The question is, will we make the necessary steps? Will there be enough effort? And will the FMC even have the power to enforce or actually do anything about this? I mean, we're dealing with international entities here. So it's very, very challenging. Now, I've been on a pedestal here, and I'm going to get right off, and I'm going to switch this thing over to Melissa. So, Melissa, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Jason.
I am glad. Sun is shining, and come on, Michigan summer. We both love it. So, or not summer, whatever, almost summer. So, I want to start off by asking you this: you're a shipper. Why contract in 2023?
Well, it really depends on what commodity and the lanes that you're looking at. If you're shipping something that it's absolutely necessary for you to have some predictability in the rates, then a contract is going to make the most sense. You've got that rate stability, you know exactly what you're going to pay. Maybe you're comfortable with paying a little bit above where the market truly is, just to have that low risk kind of scenario. You should have space, right? You talked about some of the issues that happened during the pandemic. So I won't go too much into the conspiracy theories about space allocation with steamship lines, but theoretically, if you have a contract, you should be able to count on that space. So yeah, it's a lower risk, even if you're paying for that.
Yeah. And we heard that through a few people as well. And obviously the pandemic created a lot of breakdowns all over the place. So it's very hard, you've got your causation versus correlation, and it can get really challenging pointing the finger. And I totally agree with you on that. So, okay, let's think about this. What about this contract season? What are some new challenges that we have been facing, just given the post-pandemic environment?
Well, like you mentioned, we're still coming out of COVID. So there's a lot of factors at play. We're seeing a lot of people who have high inventory levels still. And so maybe their volumes are still tampered down a little bit, and will ramp up later in the year. But there are so many uncertainties with the economy too. So we're counting on that ramp up to happen in Q3, Q4, which may or may not happen, right?
Mhm.
Because securing a contract, you're dealing with a lot of kind of futures and guessing. We're only kind of surmising what will happen
Yeah.
with the freight market, with consumer demand in general. So it can be a little bit tricky.
Yeah. Have you been seeing some hesitancy from shippers in general for like really making these commitments on space right now?
Definitely. Yeah, I'm definitely seeing that hesitancy. And it's also because the carriers are pushing the contracts so hard too. So, especially coming out of the last couple of years where it was tough to even get a meeting with a carrier, let
Mhm.
alone secure a contract. Now we're seeing the complete opposite where carriers are pushing the contracts and trying to meet with shippers and, trying to secure that freight, but we're seeing high MQCs, like you mentioned. So that volume commitment, they're trying to lock it in and make sure that the steamship line can claim that for them versus the competitor.
Mhm.
So it's kind of a handcuff situation that some shippers are not comfortable getting themselves into right now.
Yeah. Honestly, this comes like right on the heels of Maersk saying that Q1 is going to be their best quarter of this year, and they're battening down the hatches. Like, and yeah, I can imagine they're hungry. They want to fill their vessels. And you and me both have watched this insane number of blank sailings since the beginning of the year. And it's a challenge because yeah, the ocean carriers, they're going to pull capacity out because why run empty vessels? That doesn't make any sense. But from a shipping standpoint, how do you have shipping stability when blank sailings are being announced on lanes that regularly? Hey, we can ship this day. Nope, that's a blank sailing now, and
Right.
that's so challenging. Okay,
And
so
that's happening to both people who are using spot rates and who have a contract.
yeah.
Having a contract is not going to protect you from, getting rolled
Mhm.
due to a blank sailing.
That's honestly a great point. And I think what's probably the most stressful for most people, right, is we're like, okay, we're out of freight Armageddon, but it's kind of like out of the pot and into the fire, right? Because like
Right.
now we don't have this massive excess of demand, but we're still having supply chain breakdown because the lack of demand. I mean,
Mhm.
the total whiplash. So, okay, a lot of questions here. So we negotiate contracts all the time on shippers' behalfs. Um,
Yes.
tell us how we can help shippers in this process.
Well, we have a fantastic pricing department who also has their finger on the pulse of what the market rate should be. And so we've got that intel to bring to the table and say, hey, this contract that you're being offered is very good, or know when we've got an opportunity to maybe negotiate a little bit more. And also, supply chain solutions, we can leverage the volume that we have with multiple shippers on a lane, and between all of the branches that we have. So that's a really powerful reason to work with somebody like us.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what's kind of fun about us, and when we've got our full service customers that are using our domestic team, our warehouse team, obviously the customs international team, we've got a
Mhm.
pretty good lens for how your inventory moves, and we can definitely aid you in that process. If you're hey,
Mhm.
what's my MQC going to be, right? What am I going to be
Mhm.
coming to the negotiation table with? It's
Right.
it's demand planning right now is probably the most stressful thing out there, right?
I would imagine,
It's
yes.
it's not a fun topic, but I mean, we've got enough experience negotiating that we know how to come to the table in a way. And if we know your business, that also helps too. So I was on a panel, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. So I was on a
Mhm.
panel with an automotive supplier, and we were talking about contracts. And this was earlier, and actually they signed really early into some contracts.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think hindsight, could have been a good plan for them, but their strategy was sign many contracts, make them small contracts, but then don't sign more than 50% of total volume, and the rest rely on the spot market. And
Mhm.
they said the same thing you're saying. They're like, there is a benefit to having the price stability. There's a benefit to having that service requirement, but at the same time, it's hard for them to want to get into a contract when the spot
Mhm.
market, particularly, and this is back in March, particularly when the spot market is just so much lower than what contracted rates needed to be, not just
Right.
completely messing up the almost cussed there, messing up the carrier. So, okay, how do you have you seen this strategy used by other people? How do you feel about
I
this?
have for sure. And because the other thing that's attractive about that strategy is it leaves you room to send some volume on a spot rate with a carrier who may be a contracted carrier,
Mhm.
so it allows for a little bit of time, especially if the contract is a 12-month one and you're thinking that the market will continue to correct itself later in the year, just to throw the dice a little bit and think that, okay, we're going to keep using the spot rates that we have with the same contract carrier until things equalize a little bit in that regard.
Mhm. Have you a quick question? So, from a contract standpoint, from the requirements, are you seeing carriers kind of change their wording and change the way they're presenting these contracts this year?
Absolutely. It's been very interesting. One of the things that I'm seeing more of are some ambiguous environmental charges
Mhm.
being included in the contract, partly because I like to give the carriers the benefit of the doubt, because I think we're seeing a lot of changes from a regulatory standpoint from ports globally that something is coming, but we don't know what those
Mhm.
increased costs will be. And so, more than one contract I took a look at this season had some language that this doesn't include the environmental charge, but it didn't include what that number would be or give
Yeah.
any kind of indication. So, there is some thought or fear that this could be used as another GRI to
Mhm.
manipulate the rates down the line. So, to get people locked into a contract and then oh, this environmental charge will be, significant and actually start having an impact on some of the shipping decisions that we're making.
Yeah. Honestly, the environmental charges, that's such a great point because we kind of have a stacking effect right now happening with some of these environmental regulations. We've
Yes.
got our yearly IMOs, but then we also have this new the carbon vessel factor that's going to be coming
Mhm.
into effect here the beginning of next year, but I guess it's already being analyzed. And from a strategy standpoint, I know a lot of the shippers, or excuse me, a lot of the ocean carriers out there had been, they're using some of the opportunity. They bought a bunch of boats and they're phasing
Mhm.
out some of the boats, but it is kind of tricky with a contract right now because of those charges and the fact that they'll come into effect at the beginning of next year. So, yeah, what do you feel for shippers trying to trying to navigate some of these new line items? Should they come to us and be like, hey, what is this? What's my risk? What do you think about that?
We're definitely a good source of that kind of expert knowledge in this industry. So I think it would be smart to consult with somebody who's aware of what's happening on from a global perspective. But also, I think it's really important, especially keeping in mind those examples you brought up in the beginning of the show, that shippers are keeping track and documenting either the reasons why they're not able to use their contracted carriers or the, prices that they're hearing so that when it comes to contract renewal next year, you're able to have a constructive conversation as to either why you didn't hit the MQC or why you're reluctant to commit to a similar volume the following year,
Interesting.
just because of all of these other factors that are going on.
That is a fascinating one. It's almost like the ocean shipping lines are like, hey, yeah, we might have been in a tough spot these past couple of years, but you have put us in a tough spot in the past. And so let's
Mhm.
kind of keep a document of this. That's very fascinating. Are you seeing any ocean shipping lines that are kind of standing out from the others, maybe offering, more incentives, so to speak, to get into a contract, a little bit less aggressive with some of the MQCs and things like that?
I see definitely there are carriers who are more willing to work with shippers and kind of have a more of a dialogue. We've had some more success with Hapag Lloyd this year and being open to having those conversations and work together to kind of find a good medium. There are still some steamship lines that say this is the contract, accept
Mhm,
it or don't, and
mhm,
are completely not open to any kind of volume discussion or lane updates or considering target rates at all. So that is still existing. However, I've seen carriers like that also come back with a second offer when
mhm.
the first offer is refused. So it's kind of a mixed bag still.
Yeah, I gotta say, if you are negotiating your contracts on your own, and let's say, you're this is one of the first years you're doing it, definitely contact us so we can help you out. We've had a lot of experience at that negotiating table. And one of the things I think that's interesting, and I love the way you put it, is a lot of these ocean liners, they haven't even given shippers the time of day before. So they get into this
Mhm.
contract season and they can be a little rough. And yeah, but hey, we all know where demand is right now. We know there's a lot of inventory in the system. I think it's important to understand if you don't feel like you're getting a good deal on your contract, then you need to work with someone because you should be able to lock in something that's very reasonable. I was actually on a different panel last week, and I can't name the company, but a Michigan-based company who contracts directly with steamship lines, and they are, I we talked a little bit about the rate they're getting, and I have to be honest, it was a great rate for right now, and they're contracted. They're contracted with 80% of their volume, and so they did use other entities to help them in the negotiation process. They needed to. They knew it was a good year to do that. And if you're struggling to lock in a rate that you feel like is, it's going to be a little higher than pre-pandemic. It's just the way it is still because
Yeah.
costs in general have gone up. But if you're feeling like it's not in that realm, you need to get somebody to help you out because you'd be amazed at how much progress can be made.
Absolutely. I saw just this week in reviewing a new contract offer, some of the lanes that are coming through on one steamship line for a contract are almost double what
Mhm.
we have contract from another carrier too. So if that were the only offer that I were reviewing, it's in line with what some of our competitors are paying. It's in line with the market. I may have been tempted to accept that second contract offer without, knowing what I know about what else is out there or having the perspective that comes, from working with the carriers that we do at Supply Chain Solutions.
Yeah. And I think that you make a great point too. You really need to view this as, it's this is a really critical year for these contracts. Last year was horrible for everyone. I mean, we know that. It was the
Mhm.
beginning of a lot of disruption, and we obviously had all of the port situations which were really challenging. You know, if I feel really bad for all of the, regular West Coast port shippers because that just was tough. But this is a great year to lock in a reasonable and a good contract. And yeah, if you need to treat it like a bid. That back in the day, a lot of these ocean vessel carriers or operators were they put a lot of emphasis on history. So they really like to see the repeat business. They like to see the same
Mhm.
customers and they'd give them a good deal. And, obviously through some of the examples I ran through, you can see the reliance on these same companies, that history kind of was torn up. So I think it's an okay time to play the field a little bit and figure out,
Mhm.
hey, who's going to be the growth company and who's going to be the one to put us in the best place, and that they can use a good, healthy contract negotiation to propel you not only this year, but into the following years too.
Absolutely. And I think it's important too to come into those conversations thinking, how can this be more of a partnership relationship with the steamship line? You may discount the purchasing power that you have as a smaller shipper, but these steamship lines also have a lot of goals put out to themselves this year. Are they trying to grow in project cargo? Are they trying to grow in a particular lane? Those are the kinds of conversations you need to have so that it becomes a little bit more collaborative of a relationship versus just what can I squeeze from the steamship line this year? Because if we're all as shippers trying to move away from that kind of mindset from the steamship line, then it's only fair for us to look at where we can support their goals as well.
Yeah, I love the way you put that. So I got kind of a broad question for you. Large steamship lines versus smaller steamship lines. Do you have a better time negotiating with either end of the spectrum?
You might be surprised. I think it would be easy to assume that a smaller steamship line would be more collaborative or more flexible. That's not always going to be the case,
Mhm.
depending on the overall goals of the steamship line, on their leadership, how they performed last year, so many factors. You may have a just as good opportunity to have a good conversation with the larger steamship line.
I love that. And I want to, Melissa and me, we kind of chatted a little bit before this, and this is going to be a total one out of left field. So, Melissa, if you don't have any opinion on it, don't worry about it at all. So, MSC, how have they been? Any opinion on their negotiation this year? Because they're the carrier with the biggest news. I mean, they're splitting off their alliance in 2025.
Yeah. There's been a lot of focus on the changes in alliance. I was reading an article just yesterday who was kind of downplaying the changes in alliance, saying, there's always going to be breakups and, mixing up of the players. And so maybe we shouldn't focus on that. But you're absolutely right. MSC is a huge player, and that is going to have an effect on who we see as big in the marketplace. MSC was definitely one in my experience that was very eager to lock in a contract this year. And then if that wasn't the focus that you wanted to have, then it's been harder to have any kind of follow-up conversations, even to do, spot market kind of quoting. So that's definitely disappointing as a shipper,
Mhm.
but every steamship line is going to have a different strategy as far as what percent they hope to fill versus contract and also for spot rate volume. And it seems like with the other uncertainty that MSC is dealing with, they're leaning more towards having a heavily contract base.
Yeah, yeah. I I'm really interested in how these ocean shipping alliances line up because after that, the groundbreaking years of profit for these companies, MSC, and just for a little bit of background, they had the largest order book out of any other ocean shipping line. And when it comes online, they'll be the single largest shipping company out there. And it's funny if you watch their trajectory because it's been pretty aggressive. We worked with some aluminum shippers in the past, and they always need to find where the current the customs regulations are because it's challenging to import metal, and it always is. And he had this very gruff comment because he just didn't like working with MSC because he's like they're always so expensive. But that's probably not going to be the case, and all this stuff changes. So yeah, first of all, Melissa, thank you so much. Contract season is really daunting for a lot of
Mm.
us. And I know that, after everyone got so bruised after the pandemic, getting in, back in bed with these ocean shipping, it's tough, right? It's stressful. But
Sure.
I really like your perspective, and I really like the idea of viewing this as a partnership. And as a supply chain company, we need to make sure we're utilizing all of the links in the chain as effectively as possible, and not abusing one link just to get a short-term gain. And
Right.
so, yeah, I love that perspective. Anything else you want to mention about contracts before we close it up today?
No, may the odds be ever in your favor.
Oh my gosh, I love that. May the odds be ever in your favor and make it a great week. Thank you all for joining us today. Any follow-up questions, send them to Vanessa, send them to myself, send them to Melissa, and we'll get back to you. Thank you all.